Hello and welcome again to CEO Chat. It's now 11:30 on Friday and my name is Al Cini.
My name is Joe Asamendi.
And we're here today for this program with Meredith Toole, who is the owner and founder of Talent Point LLC, Talent Point Consulting LLC. And I'm not going to say the obvious stuff. Meredith specializes in helping organizations with people issues, but she's not an HR consultant. And
That's right.
what I'd like you to do maybe is just start off right off the bat by talking about how you're business focused rather than HR focused.
Sure, and thanks for having me. It's great
thanks
to,
for being here.
Such a pleasure
to
to have
join
you.
the two of you
It's
today.
great.
So it's interesting. We were talking a little bit earlier, and I think when I take a step back and think about what makes me different from other consultants are a couple of things. And you said it quite well, in that I start by solving a business challenge first, and how we do that through people. My whole premise is helping companies attract, recruit, and retain talent.
Okay.
So when I meet someone for the first time, they often say, "Oh, you're an HR consultant." Well, not quite. And then by the end of the conversation, as we kind of peel back that onion and I talk about the projects and the work that I do, they very then quickly say, "I've never met someone like you before."
Wow.
And so, and that comes down to not just what I do, but also then how I do it.
Right.
Okay, great.
I work with clients at both that strategic and the tactical levels to make sure that the projects we're working on are followed through successfully.
Well, let me frame it then for the people who watch our
Sure.
program. They could be business owners or managers of departments and companies. Anyway, at one level, you can help them find a sales director. But at the level at which they really need you is when they want to find the sales director, not just a sales director. So with you, it's not just about filling an open rec. And it's also not, in fact, just about filling recs. It's also about retaining the talent that they have and developing that talent.
Right.
Talk about how you work with a client to do that.
And you're right, it's not necessarily about filling a specific role. The framework that I use can apply to any role and quite frankly any industry as well. But it starts about working with them, as I said, at that strategic level, right? Getting alignment among all of the stakeholders who are going to be involved in supporting and working with this person to make sure that we know what success looks like
Right.
when this person joins. And by building a success profile, which is one of the tools that I use, that then kind of feeds the rest of the process, right? So it informs us as to exactly who we're looking for, where will we find them, so that our content marketing and so forth is smart and reaching the right people. What type of process do we need to bring them through? And I use a specific 3-step process, and with one of those steps being a simulation or a case study or something to have it kind of prove out that they can do what they say they can do,
Okay.
right? Because that's half the battle for most companies. And then making sure that we're onboarding them appropriately and continuing to develop and grow them along the way. So it's kind of that entire end-to-end process. So we start at the beginning in defining what that will look like end-to-end.
What's the length of that engagement, so to speak?
I hate to say it depends because that's like wishy-washy consultant talk,
No,
but
it's right.
but I would say normally I'm with a client somewhere between 9 and 12 months.
Oh, okay.
But depending on how many roles we're talking about, what kind of growth trajectory they're on, I mean, there's a lot of factors that impact
Okay.
that.
Well, actually, that's a great question. I happen because I know an awful lot of people out there that are watching would be lucky to get on your list of clients. I know you're busy. I mean,
Yes.
you said you were on your way here from your offices in Ballackinwood, you're in
Right.
Philadelphia.
Yes.
You were driving here and you were on the phone with clients
I was.
while you were driving
Yes.
here. While you're driving back, you're going to be on the phone
Right.
with clients. So getting on your client list is kind of a competitive process. People really ought to be working on that. I mean, you're one of the busiest consultants I think I've ever met.
Well, thanks.
And,
Thanks for taking time for the show.
and there's a reason
There
for that.
is a reason
I mean,
for
there
that.
really is a
I mean,
reason for
and you could go on Google right now and find out that one of the top 3 things topping any CEO agenda is attracting talent. Even the best companies are still faced with challenges along the way.
Okay.
So, and that's where you come in. And we before the program we were talking about how most consultants, especially in the talent area, are primarily oriented around finding reasons why you might reject somebody for a job. You're no consultant, but you're really more of a yes consultant.
Right.
You're looking for the perfect person for the role that is going to make a difference to this business owner.
Right.
And really turn the company around.
Right.
And you said it was a 3-step process.
Yeah, so I typically deploy a 3-step process, and certainly there are nuances depending on the level of the role and the client. But as most people expect, we always start with a phone interview, but it is a well-scripted, again, looking back at that success profile, so we're very clear on what we're asking on that phone interview. So it's tactical and it's meaningful for everybody involved, right?
Okay.
then an office interview of some sort. Now, some companies like to do one-on-one, some like panels. That's totally flexible, but we make sure that that second step is not only a skill assessment and understanding what they do and how it relates to the role, but also trying to uncover if they have the right cultural success attributes, right, which is speaking some of your language, because that's half the battle. And then, as I said, we always wrap it up with a case study, a simulation, a presentation, something that relates to the actual specific job duties, you know, the 3 or 5 things that we have to know you can absolutely deliver on. Because we can all sit and have a really great conversation, but I want it proven out. And I will tell you, when I work with companies, you know, a lot of them do the phone interview and they have interviews, and there are tweaks we need to make. It's sometimes training, it's sometimes quality of questions being asked, you know, just knowing what to listen for. But the simulation is the one thing that makes the biggest difference for them in achieving the results.
Great. Now we have to achieve the results of our first break, and we'll be right back with Meredith.
We'll
Perfect.
be right back.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. The toe-tapping little number they play for us.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Welcome back to CEO Chat. My name is Al
I'm
Cini.
still Joe Asamendi.
Thank you, and it's good to have you back. But more important, Meredith Toole, who is our guest and an excellent guest. Before the break, Meredith Toole runs a company called Talent Point Consulting, which specializes in finding the best people for those key critical jobs. And before the
retention.
Oh yeah,
Retention.
she's great at it, and she's very busy at it. So you gotta, if you want to get on our list of clients, it's very important. Before the break, we were talking about your simulation step, that last step, where we
Yes.
get an opportunity to try out somebody, basically in a role that we expect them to fill. You mentioned a recent CEO position that you filled.
Yeah.
That you helped to fill. So
Sure.
Could you talk about that?
Absolutely. So had a great opportunity to join a pretty big brand in Philadelphia, but we won't reveal who that is, to help them get clear on what they needed in a CEO role that they had for one of their divisions. It was a position that had experienced quite a bit of turnover year over year, and fortunately the enterprise CEO knew that, you know, there were some things that we needed to do differently. So I started that entire process with a general assessment, right? Going out to the division and talking to the people that had been there for some time to understand, well, what do they think that this role requires? What's worked, what hasn't worked? Really to get at the meat of it, because it's one thing for a leadership team to tell me what you need.
Right.
It is something completely different to talk to the group of people that will be working with them.
Sure.
And it was interesting because right away we identified what one of the challenges was. We were looking for the wrong person.
Really?
In terms of background and skill set. We were looking at people who had a little bit more industry-specific expertise instead of business expertise.
Okay,
and
really?
that in and of itself kind of was eye-opening for
Well,
everyone.
that would have been an
involved.
easy mistake to make, though. So you
Of
helped them
course.
avoid that mistake.
Again, right? And
Right.
a very easy mistake to make. And so from that point then, you know, we went through the rest of the process, but the simulation was really focused on getting them to prove out 3 to 5 core competencies, if you will, right? So we needed to make sure that they could be both a strategic leader, but also still work tactically, because there's a period of time at which we need some level of turnaround before we'll get to the point of moving the business forward. So we asked them to do a case study, and we framed it up in terms of kind of, here's the current state, here are some numbers and facts and figures you ought to know. How would you go about solving these very specific problems? And because their presentation skills to the rest of the senior leadership team is part of that, we gave it in advance, gave the candidates the opportunity to choose how they wanted to deliver that information,
Good.
and then we put them in front of the group, and they presented like they would in any other meeting.
That's
and it
terrific.
became very clear who was the right person for the job by going through that
Really?
exercise.
Just
Something
based on that
besides
exercise.
experience. That was-
Absolutely.
Yeah, see, it sounds to me like you were looking for a CEO role, which a lot of people would see that as an operational role. But there was a creativity component in this. You were looking for somebody who could think outside the box,
Right.
but reel in the details, because ultimately whatever it is we come up with, however creative it is going to have to be made into a plan.
And it's challenging to find people. You know, I always tell people there are 2 types of people: thinkers that can do, and doers that can think. And they were really struggling on which bucket do they need to be in. And so being able to prove out that somebody could cross those lines, certainly they lean more one way than another, but that they could cross that line was going to be the most effective resource.
So a lesson you learn here is that the role that you think you're filling for which there is a clear resume that fits that role. Sometimes you're better if you step out of that expectation of the resume and think about the job in a larger sense. Maybe get somebody from a different industry and move them into your. It's easier to learn the industry than it is to learn the skills it takes to be successful.
Absolutely, and I think by bringing in a third party, I'm a little bit more objective, so
Right.
I hear things differently. And then I think the other value in being involved in that process was, and this is a challenge in most organizations, it was holding everybody accountable to following a process and not going rogue and making up our own way of assessing candidates. And in that way, we made sure that it was a very balanced process as well.
Well, that's.
Getting everybody involved made sense too.
Oh, yeah, no, that's
exactly
general
right.
involvement of everybody, I think is really key. But there's another element you just touched on, which is important. Meredith Tool has a playbook.
Yes.
Meredith Tool is not a musician. Meredith Tool is not an artist. Meredith Tool is a methodical, organized scientist. And you take a scientific, I mean, you have a personality that's a good thing. So you're easy to talk to, but you really have a scientific nature. And that's, so when you say that you're methodical and organized, that's kind of part of your core values, isn't it?
Very much so, and I appreciate that you picked up on that. And I think that that's another thing that is helpful, especially in a growing organization, that I not only have the playbook, but I can come in and I put the guide rails around you and I help show you the right way of going about it so that what we do on this one occasion is repeatable and scalable. My goal is to come in and help you once and then train you to do it yourself the next
Right.
time around.
That's really key. That kind of goes back to your question, Joe, how long is the engagement? Relatively small company could hire you to get them started and maybe check in with you every now and then to just help them stay on track. Larger company with a bigger budget might want to integrate you into the executive suite for a period of time.
Right.
So that you work with them in all their meetings to make sure that they're picking things up the way they need to be picking them up to change their talent equation. Is that right?
That's right. And there's three ways I typically work with clients. One, I have some that what I call kind of more advisory services where I am part of that executive team and it's more kind of strategic conversation, being a member of their board. Sometimes that's the best way to help them get to that next level when they aren't looking for specific project or specific deliverable. I do fractional support as well. That's usually where they have an HR team or a recruiting team. Maybe they're junior, maybe they just haven't been in the business that long, but go in and really help not only build that team, but then execute on some of the work as well.
Oh, great.
And then on a project basis. So it's something that we know we need to address. It has a beginning and an end date, and we know how long it will take, and we work through it that way.
That's great. Now, I'm sorry, go ahead,
Are
Joe.
there any industries you think could, probably could use these kind of services more than they are?
Well, it does apply to every industry. We were talking a little earlier. I think the manufacturing industry
Okay.
is one that is absolutely ripe for disrupting the way that they engage with talent today.
Okay. Good.
That's great. He always asks all the great questions. And so disruption is really a part of your equation. Doing things the same way you've always done them is going to get you the same results you always
Right.
got.
Right.
If you're going to call Meredith in, it's because you want different results. You want to maybe change things up a little bit, and you certainly can help them with that.
Well, and not only just, and there has to be a willingness factor too, right? There are a lot of clients who say they want change, but then when you go in to try to help them
A
with
little
that,
bit more reluctant.
there's a little bit of resistance because it's hard to change people's behaviors and habits, right? And you know that.
We've heard that.
And it's one of the reasons why I do work differently with clients to not only create that strategy, but to collaborate and work alongside because most projects fail during change management. But if I can be there and guide them through that, that's how I guarantee that all the pretty work we do up front actually means something
It's
on
going
the
to
back end.
make a bottom line difference.
Work
to-
through the speed bumps.
Right,
that's
right.
right.
And there'll always be speed bumps.
Right.
Now, you mentioned, we mentioned earlier that you drove here from Bella Cynwyd, so we know you're Philadelphia based.
Yes.
Are all your clients in the Philadelphia area? Is that typically where you work?
Most of my clients are here, right, because my network is here, but I've
Uh-huh.
worked, I usually work the corridor of New York to DC.
Oh, really? Okay, great. So people out there that are watching, if they're in New York City or maybe as far south as Delaware,
Yeah.
Philadelphia
Sure,
certainly,
yeah.
they're all within range of having you, getting themselves, if they're lucky, added to your client list.
Right.
That's great.
And West Coast during the winter.
Good.
And now we're gonna have to work a quarter of our next break, but we'll be right back with
All
We'll be
you.
right
perfect.
back with more Meredith. Thank you. And there's Tyler's cue, and welcome back to CEO Chat. It's Friday, it's our 11:30 program.
Yep.
I'm Al Cini.
Still Joe Ossoman.
She's still Joe Osamendi, and we're here with Meredith Tool, a terrific guest who, when she was 3 years old, we just getting in the habit of asking our guests this. When you were 3 years old and somebody said, Meredith, what do you want to be when you grow up? What were you thinking you wanted to be?
Well, at 3, I probably would have told you I wanted to be famous, right, without knowing what that
Okay.
is. But that's not necessarily how things play out in life, right?
Uh-huh.
But we were talking a little bit about how I got to where
Your
I
background,
am,
I think, is
and
key. People
honestly,
wanna know that.
I've had probably 3 career inventions, and I suspect
Okay.
there are 2 more coming at some point, right?
Uh-huh.
I actually started off as a lobbyist, and I did that for about 5 years.
Interesting.
Well, I was a political science major. My mother told me I would never get a job, had to prove her wrong. Did it for 5 years, but it definitely wasn't the line of work for me. And so I had to stop and say to myself, well, what is this? What can I do with this now? And so at that point I went looking for a sales position. I thought that's kind of a similar skill set. And I found my way to a recruiting firm. And this
Okay.
is back when we still advertised in the newspapers. I hate to reveal that.
Right.
But and when I went there, I interviewed with a couple of their clients for outside sales roles, and they said, have you ever thought about being a recruiter? Well, of course not, right? And I think if you ask many of us that are in this line of work, we all sort of fell into it along the way. And so I was a headhunter for a couple of years, and then wanted to see kind of how the other half lived. So went into an internal HR role, and decided that employee relations is not my bag. I prefer to be on the more positive side of the equation when
Sure,
we're all
sure.
getting, excited.
We were thinking about doing positive things and not just dealing with the negatives that come up.
Which was unfortunately most of what
It's a
I
big
was
part of that
dealing
job, I
with,
know.
right? And
No,
so,
yeah, right.
so I headhunted my way into Ernst & Young, and I spent about 5 years with them in an internal consulting role, working both regionally and nationally with specific business units. I was always on the consulting side, so I don't know anything about accounting and tax, but helping them look at their business strategy for the year and then executing a talent strategy against that to meet their goals.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. You mentioned that you were in the recruiting business when they used to run ads in newspapers.
Yes.
I was in the recruiting business when they used to chisel the job ads on the side of rock in Latin.
Resume
Yeah.
for your hard-
So things definitely
hard
have
goal.
they have changed a lot. And this is a segment where we usually talk about how your job changes based on changes in technology,
Sure.
changes in multi-generational workforce. I know you've had some experience there too. Maybe you'd
Sure.
like to talk about that.
It changes in like the
Well,
in general, or
In general, in the industry and everybody else.
wow, there are so many, right? I mean, and it's interesting because I think one of the reasons why I'm successful now is that I was trained when you had to know how to pick up the phone and have a conversation.
Okay.
Right? We used the Yellow Pages.
So you see a swing back toward that then.
100%, because then what happened as the industry changed, recruiters thought, I sit here and I wait for resumes to come off the monster
Right.
board. Well, that worked for a very short period of time, but then people found that that wasn't necessarily, it wasn't strategic, it wasn't always the top talent, and it just impacted their results. It was that post and pray methodology, right, which doesn't work. And so unfortunately, some companies are still kind of stuck doing that. And I would say in the last 5 years, as things have gotten more competitive and will continue to do so, the way you recruit now, I mean, it is marketing and sales 100%. And if
Really?
you don't know how to go back to that and apply those tactics, you're just simply not going to win.
That's interesting. In a way, you're kind of explaining why maybe job boards and companies like Monster aren't as big as we might have imagined they would be. Because the reality is there's a limit to how much you can do purely with technology. At some point, you do have to pick up the phone and talk to somebody.
That's right.
To develop people skills again. I think that's what's missing a lot.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think that's an area where you definitely help companies. I know that part of the way you work is to try to get people to learn how to mine out of somebody else what they need to know to find out whether they're a good fit. But it's not just about that part of the life cycle. You also worry about the onboarding process. What typical mistakes do companies make onboarding that you can help them with?
They think that onboarding is a one-time single event the day you show up and that it's paperwork.
Okay.
That's orientation.
Right.
Right, and that can be a couple of days, but onboarding from my perspective needs to be an intentionally designed, well thought out, year-long kind of program where it's making sure that we have our expectations set straight out of the gate, because a lot of companies are not good at that, and they're certainly not good at holding their people accountable.
Right.
You see it, right?
That's so true.
And getting clear on that from the beginning, and crafting out what that first year looks like, and then working with the client and the candidate to make sure that we're having those regular discussions and that we're all still working on the same page, because often I find I'm sort of the liaison between the manager and the new hire in some ways.
So what you're trying to do is make sure everybody's aligned to the same goal.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
really.
Out of the gate. You don't
Out of the
wait
gate,
90
right.
days to say, you're not really meeting my
You
expectations.
want them to know on day one what your expectations are, and then they have to be. That's all really the onboarding process, and like you said, it's a continuing process,
Sustainable.
it's not a one-time
Right,
process.
it's not once.
So companies that have performance improvement processes, like annual reviews, those kinds of things, do you help with that too?
So no, it's certainly something that I make sure that they have and do so in a way that is reflective of their culture and meaningful to their people. That's usually something that's still.
How often do you find that they are, though? I mean, really, when you're going, I know, and that's why, in a way, I'm kind of setting this up. I don't
don't.
think most companies pay any attention to that at all. They
No.
know they have to have one, or they'll be sued. But you can't just look at it as a defensive maneuver. The whole point of your sphere is your people. And if you're not working with them all the time to help them, to give them the tools they need to be their best, then you're missing most of the value proposition of an employee.
And most companies don't do this well. And I think a couple of things are changing as it relates to performance reviews, right? Though we were used to getting them once a year, and it's just
Right.
kind of what you expected.
Sure.
And people only remembered what happened 3 weeks before that, and it was kind of a waste of time, and everybody dreaded it. More companies now are moving toward more frequent feedback. So using technology or other tools to be having monthly discussions about what performance looks like, which is a better way of doing it because you can catch challenges earlier,
Right.
and then everybody feels like the employee's engaged in the work and the employer's engaged in the employee, and then it changes that relationship. But so I may have a recommendation or a comment related to how they're doing that, but it's not something that I personally
It's not a
manage.
core area for you.
Right,
But,
right.
you know, we're coming up on that part of the program where you get to tell everybody how to reach you.
Okay.
Based on what I know about you, if you're a company out there and you're concerned about any one of those 3 steps that Meredith mentioned, if you're concerned that you're not getting the best people you can for the jobs you need to fill, plus getting the best out of the people who are already in the jobs you have, then Meredith Toole is the person you should call.
Thanks.
So maybe you
Good
can
pitch.
look into your camera and tell them how to do that.
Right there,
It's the
Meredith.
one,
Oh, in the middle. So
no, the one over on the left. There you go. That's okay.
talentpointconsulting.com, it's all one word. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
That's terrific. Meredith, thank you very much
Thank
for
you so
appearing on
much,
CEO
Alex.
Chat.
It's
It
good to
was
see
a great
you.
guest.
My
Nice to
pleasure.
meet you.
And thank you all for joining us today on CEO Chat. My name is Alcini,
Still Joe Esserman.
just like a half an hour ago. And go ahead, tell them.
Listen, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend. Be safe, and thanks again.
Happy Halloween. This is my costume.
all
I'm
right.
so embarrassed. That's
Yeah,
right.
dress
It's
as a
coming up.
Talk show. host.
Thanks for joining
Amazing.
us today.
Okay, thanks.